The blizzard swallowed the world whole. Gale-force winds howled through the trees, a chorus of unseen voices shrieking over the ridge. Snow fell so thick it turned the night into a shifting void. The cabin sat alone in that white abyss, its warm glow barely visible from the road. It was the only refuge for miles. Inside, 7 strangers gathered by the fire, their breaths still fogging from the cold. The storm had trapped them together, an uneasy assembly of drifters, traders, and desperate souls seeking shelter before the frost turned them into corpses. No one knew each other. No one trusted each other. The last to arrive was a man in an old gray coat. He had a sharp, bony face, sunken eyes that reflected the firelight too strangely, and an unnerving stillness about him. He barely seemed to breathe. His clothes were outdated, worn but oddly preserved, like something dug up from another time. His name, he said, was Elias Finch. He didn't knock when he entered. Didn't even seem to bring the cold with him. He just stepped inside, closing the door behind him without a sound. The others were a ragged lot, a bounty hunter, a whiskey peddler, a farmhand with blood on his boots, a woman traveling alone with a knife hidden under her coat, and 3 others who spoke little but watched everything. The tension thickened as the storm raged on. Finch sat by the fire, hands folded neatly in his lap, staring at the flames with a small, knowing smile. No one remembered seeing him eat. No one saw him take off his coat. He never once warmed his hands near the fire. And yet, he was never cold. At first, no one spoke to him. But as the hours dragged, nerves frayed, and whiskey loosened tongues. "You don't look like a man who belongs out in a storm," the bounty hunter said. Finch turned his hollow gaze toward him. "I suppose not. You travel alone? A long time now." His voice was distant, like it had to travel too far to reach them. The whiskey peddler frowned. "Where you coming from?" Finch hesitated. "A town west of here. Though I don't think it's there anymore." "What town?" "Don't remember the name." The fire crackled. The wind screamed against the windows. A heavy unease settled in the room. As the night deepened, strange things began to gnaw at their nerves. The woman noticed it first. Finch's shadow didn't always match him. Sometimes it lagged a second behind, like a poorly remembered reflection. Other times, it stretched the wrong way, as if cast by a light no one could see. The farmhand swore he saw Finch standing by the window, watching the storm. Yet when he turned back, Finch was still seated by the fire. The bounty hunter counted the footprints in the snow outside. There should have been 8 sets. He only found 7. And the whiskey peddler, feeling bold with drink, clapped a hand on Finch's shoulder, only to recoil, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" the woman asked. The peddler licked his lips. He's cold." "Of course he's cold," the bounty hunter scoffed. "No," the peddler said, shaking his head. "Not cold like us. Cold like the ground." Finch just smiled. As the night stretched, the whispers began. Soft, distant voices curling in the corners of the cabin. The wind carried strange murmurs, like hushed conversations just beyond the walls. And then came the tapping, faint, rhythmic, like fingertips against the wood. At first, they thought it was a loose shutter, but it moved, one moment at the door, then the window, then the floor beneath their boots. The woman clutched her knife. "Something's wrong in here." The farmhand whispered, "This place feel old to anyone else?" The bounty hunter nodded, like it's been waiting. Finch chuckled softly. "Oh, it has." They all turned to him. "What do you mean?" the peddler asked. Finch leaned forward. His smile was too wide. "I mean, this place was built for nights like this, built to keep things in." The room went deathly still. The fire dimmed. The shadows stretched. The bounty hunter reached for his gun. "What the hell are you talking about?" Finch tilted his head. You don't recognize this place, do you? They stared at him. Of course not, but I do. He glanced at the walls, at the ceiling beams, at the floorboards with something almost nostalgic. I've been here before. A long silence. The woman whispered. When Finch smiled. A long time ago. The room felt smaller. The fire flickered, fighting against the deepening dark. The peddler spoke, voice thin. You say you came from a town west of here? Yes. The bounty hunter frowned. What town? Finch's eyes glinted. It had a name once, but names fade when no one speaks them anymore. The farmhand swallowed. What happened to it? Finch's grin stretched. It burned. No one moved. Finch sighed, almost wistfully. The fever took most of them first. Some of us held out, but the sickness was cruel. When the fire came through, it was a mercy. He looked up at them. I remember the heat, the smoke, the way the sky turned red. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a sheriff's badge, blackened, warped by flame. The bounty hunter paled. No. Finch turned the badge over in his fingers, staring at it like an old friend. I was the last to go, held out as long as I could. But you can't argue with fire. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin. The shutters rattled. The fire guttered. And for the first time, someone whispered what they were all thinking. The woman's voice trembled. You're dead. Finch looked at her, and he smiled. The wind howled louder. The walls groaned. The shadows grew teeth. And the tapping started again, this time from inside the walls. Finch stood, his joints popping like old wood. He stepped back from the fire, and as the light moved, something about him changed. His skin seemed too tight. His clothes hung wrong. And for a fleeting moment, they all saw it, the thing beneath his face. The thing that had been dead a long, long time. The woman screamed. The fire blew out. Darkness swallowed the cabin whole. By morning, the blizzard had passed. The cabin stood silent, untouched in the snow. Inside, the fire was long dead. The chairs were empty. The people who had taken shelter, they were gone. But in the corner, sitting peacefully by the cold hearth, was an old gray coat. A sheriff's badge rested beside it, burned, blackened, waiting for the next storm.
That's it for tonight's tale. But don't worry, there's always more where that came from. Be sure to stay tuned for even more nerve-thrilling horror stories every single week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us here at the Hollow Horror. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe. Or stay scared. See you next time.